Hello and welcome to Professional Insights by Dementia Action Alliance. My name is John Richard Pagan and I am living with dementia. I also sit on the advisory panel for Dementia Action Alliance. And today we are bringing you attorney John Tucker. John Tucker has represented individuals seeking disability benefits for over 28 years. He received his law degree from the University of Florida in 1991 and handles claims and lawsuits related to Social Security disability, employer group disability insurance, individual disability insurance, and veterans service-connected disability compensation through the VA. Accolades he has received include highest peer review rating for ability and ethics by Martindale and Hubble, and being rated as superb by avvo.com. He is also on other esteemed lists, including the Florida Legal Elite and Florida Super Lawyers. Mr. Tucker has a lot of how-to-do information online at his website, which we encourage you all to take a look at www.tuckerdisability.com. And you should be able to see that link on the recording. He offers many tips on how to apply for disability services. With that said, I'd like to introduce you to John Tucker. Good afternoon, John Tucker. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing well, JR. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. So, as we start this process, my very first question is going to be on basically how do we start thinking about applying for disability?
I think that comes to someone when they reach a point when they decide they're not going to be able to continue to work. So that decision may come before they stop working, or it may come after they stop working. But when they reach that realization that they're not going to be able to continue to do the job that they're doing, that's the time to think about it. And there are things that come up in our lives as we go about working that we may not have any control over. But obviously the decision whether to keep working is a decision that we can make ourselves, unless our employers make that for us and tell us we're not doing the job properly and terminate. So you have to be aware of your surroundings, know what's going on at work, and pay attention to how you're performing, whether you're making errors, and of course, you know your own personal medical condition. So it's a very personal decision, and it can be a big challenge. Obviously, when you decide to stop working, particularly if you've worked for 20 or 30 or more years, that's a big part of your life. And that can be very, very difficult to deal with.
I noticed that you made the comment of the employer letting you go because you're not doing your work as you did, which is not uncommon for a person living with dementia. Their work skills shift and they're incapable of handling things the way they used to.
Correct.
And sometimes they end up losing their work time even before they've received their retirement pension, sometimes shortly before. Is this a type of case that you would typically handle?
Yes, and you've got different types of disability benefits at play there. An employer's disability plan, it may be important to make a decision to apply before the employer comes in and says, you can't do the job anymore, we're letting you go. Social Security disability, you can make that decision after employment ends, as you can usually with individual insurance. But most attorneys that do Social Security disability would certainly handle a claim like that.
Okay, and you mentioned that you can still do the Social Security disability. So tell me a little bit about what kind of documents you might want to start preparing in order to apply for Social Security disability.
So today, if you go to apply for Social Security disability, you can do it online at their website, which is ssa.gov. You can actually go into their system, create an account, and apply. Now, I recommend before somebody applies that they download their Social Security earnings statement. You may have gotten one of those in the past in the mail, but a few years ago, Social Security stopped sending those out. The value of that document is it tells you how much they would pay you. It also has a history of the earnings that you have reported through your taxes. So getting that document is important before you apply, because you actually cannot get it after you file an application. They cut off your ability to get that. Once you do that, you also want to compile all of your doctor's names, addresses, and phone numbers, as well as your medication list. When you apply for Social Security disability, you've got to report a lot of fairly basic information about yourself: your name, address, your Social Security number, all these types of things. But they also need to know where you're getting medical care and what kind of care you're getting. That includes hospitals, physical therapy, tests that may have been done, that type of thing. So the absolute most important thing after you get your Social Security earnings statement is to compile a list of all of your medical providers. You'll also be asked to provide information about the identity, the names, addresses, and so on of your employers. So you should compile that too. And the whole process to apply online, depending on how many doctors you have, it can take anywhere from about a half an hour to maybe an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how much you have to type in and your ability to type, obviously.
It's okay to have your loved one or caregiver or care partner to assist you with that process?
That's a great question. It's perfectly fine. But I offer you this tip. If somebody else does it for you, make sure in the section of the application where it asks if there's anything else you'd like to tell Social Security about, that person types that they had to do it for you. If part of your limitation is your ability to operate on a computer, to actually utilize a computer, to utilize a keyboard or process information with a cognitive problem, you want the government to know that somebody else is having to do this fairly simple task for you, because the application process is allegedly set up so that a fourth grader could do it. Well, if you're having difficulty doing it because you can't process information, that's a crucial factor in proving that you're disabled.
Okay. One of the things that I often hear is about compassionate disabilities, things that are supposed to speed things up. Is dementia one of those? And how does that work?
There can be a compassionate allowance when a person has an advanced stage of dementia. That has to be made plain in the application, meaning the application has to give enough information that Social Security, or the state agency that makes the decisions for Social Security at the application process level, has to be able to understand what's going on. So usually if you provide a clear statement that a person has advanced or advancing dementia and give the supporting medical information, that is a possibility. I caution people, though, the government's compassionate allowance program is not always something that they'll rely upon. And it's very common for a person to have a condition that's on the list or that should be considered, but the government simply doesn't apply it, and they have to go through the process, including appeals.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the wonderful appeal process. So we hope not to have to do that. How can people document their limitations and restrictions? What can they do to better express what they're struggling with to the person reviewing these documents?
There's really three different ways that I recommend to people. The first is when you treat with your doctors, which you should do on a regular basis, tell the doctors what's going on. Now, I don't mean just the physician or mental health professional that's treating a condition like dementia. I mean every physician or healthcare professional you see. Often you go into a doctor, they give you a form to ask what's going on, and most people are inclined, for instance, to tell the urologist about their urological problems. They don't tell them about their cognitive problems.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend you tell every doctor across the board what's happening. And the way you do that, particularly given the chance to talk to the doctor or their nurse, is with examples. Tell them what's happening. Be clear with them so that they can understand what it's like to be inside your skin. It's really a challenge to read medical records when somebody says, for instance, I have memory problems, and that's the only statement. that's in the records. But if the records are filled with examples of the types of things that the person's had challenges with, it really brings it to life and makes it a lot easier to understand. So if I pick up a medical record, or the state agency doctor picks up a medical record when they're reviewing the file, and it talks about how the person went to their doctor and explained that they were trying to make a sandwich, but they left the cheese off the sandwich even though they had pulled it out, set it on the counter, and just left it there. Never put it back in the refrigerator. They simply forgot to do it. Well, that's a fantastic example to help someone understand that that person can't do even simple 1, 2, 3-step processes. So what the government's looking for oftentimes is, can you do a simple job? And when you give them examples of simple things you can't do, that can be really crucial. So that's one thing. Tell your doctors everything that's going on. The second is keep a journal for yourself. Even someone who doesn't have dementia will have a problem remembering what they did 6 weeks ago, or giving a specific example of something that happened in their life. So if you keep a journal about things that are going on in your world that would help somebody understand how limited you are, particularly with examples that tie to events, it's easy for you to go back into your journal and then refer to that. So if you can tell somebody, well, at Thanksgiving, I had family over and this happened. Those kinds of personal details help make you more believable. Okay. And the third thing is, tell the people around you. You know, it's very common for people to want to be very private about their conditions. We're not conditioned in our society to go telling people that things aren't going well. In fact, somebody asks you how you are, you probably say, I'm fine, but you're not fine. And people don't come to me for disability benefit assistance when they're fine, but I'm amazed at the number of people that that's what they say, particularly to their doctors. Right. So tell your loved ones, tell your friends, even tell your coworkers, if it's not going to jeopardize your job, what's going on. You can even tell them examples so they know what's happening in your world too. At some point, Social Security is actually going to ask you for a couple of names of people they can send a form to. And hopefully that person is able to say, well, with my own eyes, this is what I've seen happen. Okay. And that's important. But if nobody knows anything about what's happening to you, that can really be a challenge.
So you've mentioned journaling, you've mentioned letting people know, and you've mentioned medical records. So my question would be, does it benefit us to have letters of referrals or recommendations back to from our friends, or does it help to have our medical records with us when we submit our paperwork for Social Security, or is all of that requested later?
Well, when you apply online, the government is going to get your medical records. You can send them in, but the government is supposed to get them. Now, if you want to make sure that the government has your records, you send them in. And typically, once you apply, you're going to get something in the mail telling you how you would do that. The most common way is they'll send you a barcode and you can fax information to them. Don't count on the fact that the fax is going to go through and it's going to make its way into the file. Many people find that out the hard way, but be persistent and continue to send your own records in. That's perfectly fine. This caveat: don't sanitize your medical records. For instance, if you live in a medical marijuana state, don't take out the records that talk about using marijuana. Now, marijuana usage on Social Security can be a problem, but if the government thinks you're taking records out of what you're sending in, it's going to hurt your credibility.
Really?
Keep in mind that you can't win a disability case without being you. Just tell them what it's like to be you. You don't have to lie, and nobody is smart enough to be a successful liar anyway. So give them all of the information. And in fact, in their regulations, you have an obligation to tell them everything that would impact your disability claim: the good, the bad, and the ugly. So even the evidence that hurts you is something you have to disclose. So having friends write letters can be helpful too. You mentioned letters of recommendation. I would not characterize it that way. In fact, I caution people that you don't want a letter of recommendation. You don't want a letter that says JR is a good guy. What you want is a letter that says, I know JR this well. I see him this often. We've known each other for years, and I have seen this change in him. Again, with my own eyes, this is what I've seen happen. That way, you've got a person who's a candid witness. They're not sounding like they're your cheerleader. They're not there as your buddy just to back you up. And again, they're not giving you a letter of recommendation. What they're saying is, these are the problems I've seen. And there's really no way for the government to challenge that person, because if the person says, I've witnessed it, what's somebody at Social Security going to say? You're a liar? That's just not going to happen. And if you have the ability to have several people write that kind of a letter, that's great, particularly if they know you from different aspects of your life. I've often told people, the further away from your bloodline you can get, the better. So having your father or your mother, your brother, your sister, your spouse write a letter is fantastic. But if you can get that out to your priest, your rabbi, your neighbor, your coworker, much better, because those people are generally viewed as being less interested in your claim and not as one-sided.
Well, thank you for all of that information. We've come to the end of our time, but I know that we're going to get an opportunity to share all this information with a group of people in open discussion here on the 30th of April. So I look forward to hearing more as people ask questions. Is there any last thing that you'd like to say before I wrap this up?
I know a lot of people are curious about Medicare entitlement when they apply for Social Security disability. So if I could, I'd like to make a comment or two about that.
Okay.
You're going to get an entitlement to Medicare 24 months after your entitlement to Social Security disability starts. So very often people will continue their COBRA to cover that gap. Sometimes that's not possible. But from the time Social Security says you became disabled and eligible to receive Social Security benefits, count 24 months forward, and that's when Medicare will start. And from your Social Security disability check, each month you can have deducted your Medicare Part B and Part D premium. They'll give you Part A, which is hospitalization, but you can pay for the physician visits and the drug coverage separately out of your own premium. And it's extremely inexpensive compared to private health insurance. So I would certainly recommend that you opt for that unless you have some type of a health plan that allows you to have that as primary, and then you can consider doing a Medicare supplement. Typically, with a large group, it's the other way around. You have to opt into Medicare, and then your group coverage is supplemental.
Okay. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate all the feedback that you've given and your time. And again, I can't wait to hear what other people have to ask you when we get together.
I look forward to answering questions.
For all of you who are joining us, thank you again for doing so. You can look for other great recordings at daanow.org under Professional Insights. And thank you for sharing for this time. Have a good day.
Connecting our lives to help us survive, so we live our time to the fullest we can. We're living our lives with purpose and